We'll be talking about a continuation of the Vienna Convention of 1969, in which the Vienna Convention of 1969 governs all treaties. So it is a convention that governs all treaties, so therefore it is a treaty in itself. It's a multilateral treaty that the nations signed off on in agreement to have the Vienna Treaty of 1969 to police the policy of all treaties, meaning that you always have to have a referee to deal with all disputes. So in the Olympics, if the United States of America Corporation is playing against China Corporation, because China is really what? What's the real name of the nationals there? The Manchurians, who speak Mandarin. So China is the corporate name, okay? So it's the doing business as. So what you have to understand is, in this particular scenario with regards to treaties, every time there's a dispute between nations, treaty means how you treat each other. And how do you determine how you treat each other? Oftentimes it must be in a material fact document, and that document is what helps to deal with all disputes. But that document is also what you call the politics of how you deal with nations. Because documents oftentimes, although they come from the mother, it's still the politics of how you deal with disputes, okay? When you're dealing with government. So today we'll go to the Vienna Convention of 1969, Article 61, I do believe.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see if we can enlarge this just a little bit more. Can we do that?
Yeah.
Here we go. Article 61 for the Vienna Convention of 1969. So we'll read it, and then we'll do our interpretations. Because anytime you're reading a treaty, a constitution, any type of bylaws, you must also understand what is the parable. What's a parable? Parable means what's the comparison based in law. And whatever subject matter that you're dealing with, okay? Whatever the dispute is between the parties, you want to look at the parable. So oftentimes while we're reading the Vienna Convention, we'll talk about the parable, which is the Treaty of Peace and Friendship of 1786. At the time, Sidi Muhammad signed it in the courts of Morocco, and then the United States of America Republic signed it through their constitution in 1787, all right? All right, so, excuse me, through their, not at the time, the United States of America didn't have their constitution in 1789. However, through their Continental Congress of 1787, they fully ratified the treaty, all right? Just to get the subject matter correct, based upon sequential order of their constitutions. Okay, here we go. Article 61, if someone would like to read it, preferably a matriarch, because everything's about the matriarchs.
Article 61.
Then speak up, please.
Supervening impossibility of performance.
Let's stop right there. So before we go any further, supervening means an interruption, a disturbance of something that was already existing. Something is supervening. Something is in a position where it's trying to supersede something that's already a fact, such as a bill of attainder or something that's ex post facto. So supervening means something that's coming in to make an interruption of something that's already a material fact. Okay? So supervening.
Impossibility of performance.
All right.
1A.
So let's stop right there. Impossibility. What are they really saying there? Impossibility.
Means it's not possible at all. Impossibility.
Mm-hmm. So it's imposing. Something's creating an impediment.
Yeah, give me an impediment.
Mm-hmm. All right. So
we won't be able to complete it.
So it's more. Go ahead.
To whatever treaty that is being looked at.
That is correct. So something is creating an impediment. Something is supervening, almost like construction on the road. They have the signs there. Detour. That's supervening. Something is posing an impediment, right? It's obstructing the pathway. Let's continue. Supervening impossibility of performance.
1. A party may invoke the impossibility of performing a treaty as a ground for terminating or withdrawing from it if the impossibility results from the permanent disappearance or destruction of an object indispensable for the execution of the treaty.
Let's continue.
If the impossibility is temporary, it may be invoked only as a ground for suspending the operation of the treaty.
All right, number 2.
2. Impossibility of performance may not be invoked by a party as a ground for terminating, withdrawing from, or suspending the operation of a treaty if the impossibility is the result of a breach from that party, either of an obligation under the treaty or of any other international obligation owed to any other party to the treaty.
All right, so let's take it from the top of section 1 of Article 61. So what are we talking about initially? Now, just from the title, you should already have a fundamental understanding what is about to be presented to you. What's about to be presented to you is, if in fact you're dealing with an impediment within a treaty, this is how you deal with it. They're giving you a step-by-step understanding. How do you deal with impediments of something that's happening that's ex post facto? A bill of attainder that's ex post facto, that's creating an impediment of a treaty, meaning something's happened outside of the treaty. Okay? So let's talk about that. Number 1, a party may invoke the impossibility of performing a treaty as a ground for terminating or withdrawing from it if the impossibility results from the permanent disappearance or destruction of an object indispensable for the execution of the treaty. Let's stop right there at the first sentence. So we're talking about something here has happened that is, in my opinion only, something that's catastrophic. Something that has totally made a complete burden of the treaty. Let's now put the parable to it. So the colonists came here looking for refuge and asylum in the land of Amexem, northwest Amexem, Turtle Island, politically known as America. Okay? Now, what happened? When they got here, people had nationalities. When the colonists came here, the colonists no longer wanted to be considered to be British anymore. Thus the reason why they didn't want to pay taxes, because they say, hey, I'm not British. Why do I have to pay taxes to the crown? So they have to replace their name with a nom de guerre to take them outside of the law of being British nationals. What did they replace it with? Terms such as settlers, pilgrims, colonists, white people, quote unquote, etc. All nom de guerres, all ens legis, all artificial persons that have nothing to do with nationality.
What was that word you said? Interlegis?
Ens legis. Ens legis means corporation. So an ens legis, E-N-S, legis, L-E-G-I-S, ens legis, 2 words, means corporation. All right, continuing. So what happened here? In this first part 1, a party may invoke the impossibility of performing a treaty as a grounds for terminating or withdrawing from it if the impossibility results from the permanent disappearance or destruction of an object indispensable for the execution of the treaty. So what did the colonists put in place, i.e. the secret societies, the pilgrims, put in place in the 18th century that started to now breach the treaties? What specifically is 3 things that happened between 1868 and 1871?
Naturalization Act.
So Naturalization Act of what year?
1870.
1870, what else?
14th Amendment.
14th Amendment of 1868, what else? Act of Congress, 1871. All of these impediments supervening impossibility of performance. Why? Because the colonists, as well as some of the sellout, converso, COINTEL Moors who came together in their secret societies, decided to undermine the treaties. And anytime you're undermining the treaties, it means you're really undermining the matriarchs, the mothers of the true nation, which is the foundation to everything. The patriarchs took over. and they started to give themselves artificial names. Everybody all of a sudden became person, quote unquote, all caps. That's why they call it the capitalist society. We live in a capitalist society. That's what they tell you all the time. It's a capitalist society. It has to do with the capitalization of everyone's name. Keep in mind, back in those days, first thing they did, your first name was in a proper noun. If your first name was John, it was capital J, lowercase, small case, O-H-N. Then it was your last name, all caps. Then over a period of time, they put first name, all caps, then last name, all caps. Then after a period of time, now they got your last name, all caps. Now your middle initial period, last name, all caps. They continue to set up these different corporations and shells based all upon your name. Because your name is a corporation that can be changed at any time. So everything's capitalist society is about the capitalization of names and titles. That's what capitalization or capitalist society means. They're doing it right in front of your face, but you don't recognize it. Why? Look at the definition of black. In the definition of black, it tells people who are defined as being black people, who associate the term black people, that's actually an adjective. It says in the linear entry, zero stimula of the retina. Zero stimuli of the retina. Go ahead, Haji.
So I've been reading this over and over. The United States corporation basically they've supervened on the treaty by converting the Moors into black, Negro, and colored people.
Dead corpse.
Persons.
Civil War II.
And since there are technically they're not acknowledging any Moors that are part and parcel of the Moroccan Empire, which is the other party to the treaty, they're basically suspending performance because of that.
Correct.
And they're attempting to.
Correct.
And so as we're coming back, individually declaring Moorish status is one thing. We're coming back as a provincial government and having other provincial governments acting government to government under the auspices of the existing and pre-existing Moroccan Empire. That takes on a whole other dimension.
Correct.
So that supervening will go fallow because they will no longer be able to do that. They can do it with some, but once they're doing government to government, they can't do it.
That is correct, and that's the key word. Right now, they're not operating under a republic government, as we all know, but for the purpose of the recording, right now they're operating on a corporation of the United States, or the U.S.
Right.
Which is the corporation which is not a party to the treaty. The treaty says specifically United States of America, but yet the United States Corporation puts U.S. on all of their documentation. They'll ask you on a questionnaire, are you a U.S. citizen? And everybody checks the box. Why? Because they're incompetent. Mm-hmm. Incompetent means, A, you don't even know who you are. You're disabled. You suffer from what's called psychosis. Psychosis means you lack reality of self. You don't know the difference between Santa Claus and your parents. You don't know fiction from nonfiction. You're also suffering what's called cognitive dissonance, which is disconnection from reality. The reality is, no matter how old you are, you still have a minor thinking because you still think that people are crayons, i.e. adjectives. Black people, white people, yellow people, brown people, and red people. They don't exist in law, common law. All right, let's get back to point. So right now, the United States did what? They created an impediment, something that's supervening, because what happened? They made the Moors disappear. So let's read it. A party may invoke the impossibility of performing a treaty as a ground for terminating or withdrawing from it if the impossibility results from the permanent disappearance. The colonists, through hypothecation, through the pen, through an act of Congress, and through the Naturalization Act, caused Moors to disappear. What disappeared? Their nationality. They didn't disappear physically, they disappeared on paper without giving their own consent. So therefore, that's what you call fraud. What else happened? From the permanent disappearance or destruction. You remember they talked about Reconstruction after the Civil War? It was really destruction. They were destroying what? Books, destroying the real history, and giving an overlay of their own history. Removing the Moors and them becoming imposters by taking on the characteristics of Moors being the real sovereigns. On paper they did this, hypothecation, as well as escheat, E-S-C-H-E-A-T, escheat.
I'm here, buddy. What else speak about?
Okay.
What does escheat mean? It means that there is a blockage, there's a supervening obstruction of your bloodline. That on paper they say you were dead. Dead at what? Dead at sea. Under Admiralty and Maritime law, they say you're dead at sea. So that is disappearance, because they're saying your ship capsized. That's why in Louisiana they call them parishes. People perish at sea. You perished. Disappearance. A destruction of your ship, your vessel. You are a vessel. You're also a vassal under Admiralty and Maritime law. Totally different political status. Moors based upon consanguinity are still living. But by your own consent and by your admission, you marking the box black if you're not cognizant of who you are. But Moors know who we are. So what mistake are we making? We have to now, from a political perspective, have government in place and a constitution that brings you back to life on what? Paper. Because the world now is ran on politics. It's not your abstract saying I'm a Moor. No, how do you prove it? Your government, your mother, must say you're a Moor through a government of a body politic. Politics matters now amongst nations. The politics is what? Constitution, votes based upon elections, inaugurations, flag, population, seal, etc. It's paper. Everything's paper. Paper can bring you back to life, and paper can also say you're dead. Death certificate. It's paper. That's the material fact. Okay, let's get back to it. So therefore, still sticking with number one, sentence one, disappearance or destruction of an object indispensable for the execution of the treaty. Why can't the Moors execute the treaty? Why are they having impediments in executing the treaty?
You need
Anybody?
two parties.
You need two parties. Excellent, good brother. So who are the parties to the contract of the Treaty of Peace and Friendship?
United States of America.
Correct. And who else?
Moors.
The Moors. So therefore, the Moors, through their abstract, are saying, we're Moors. The United States keeps coming back saying your identification is invalid. They're giving you the answers to the test. Why? Because you don't have politics in place, i.e. government. Well, ANPAC has a government. We have a constitution through our elected officials. It's been fully ratified. We have a seal, and we have a flag, as well as a trust, and we have a allodial land claim on the latitude, longitude, provincial area, formerly known as the State of Colorado Corporation, that never had the land. It was an overlay through a political, what's called extraterritorial jurisdiction. You have a question?
Yes.
Let's get back to it. So that has created an impediment because the Moors have been talking to the United States. We're not talking to the real party of the contract. So there's two violations. Moors don't have government, although ANPAC has government, on the record, for the record. through a constitution. So now we must force the United States of America's representatives, their ministers and consuls, to come to the table. So right now, when you start understanding the Treaty of Paris, the Ghent Treaty, the John Jay treaties, you're going to find out the United Kingdom is now operating in the place of the United States of America. Go ahead, Haji.
Just a side note, you might want to edit this. The when you're talking about the Constitution, the true Constitution is not United States of or United States for. It's always United States of America.
Yes.
It is, but the difference is Constitution for the United States of America or Constitution of the United States of America. That's where the for and the of come in after the Constitution and before United States of America.
That is correct, Haji. Thank you for letting us know that it is the Constitution for the United States of America. That's the Republic of 1789. That's the impediment. Okay, let's get back to it. Second sentence, if under number 1, Article 61, number 1, sentence 2, if the impossibility is temporary, it may invoke only as a ground for suspending the operation of the treaty. Now, what makes it temporary? Anytime something is not updated in a contract where there's an addendum to change specific language, then immediately that means the contract hasn't changed. So it's temporarily suspended through hypothecation right now because they suspended on their documentation, saying they're going to be someone different and then labeled us under a nom de guerre to be something different. So the original contracts have been suspended because no one's operating under it right now. We're operating on a totally de facto status right now. Not AMPAC. AMPAC is de jure. We're back to their treaties as nationals because of our Constitution, our elected officials. However, other Moors who are operating outside of a constitution of a government for the people, by the people, through elections and have a constitution are still acting as individuals. You have to put together a government in order to enforce the treaty because a government put together the treaty. Okay, so right now everything's temporary, but AMPAC's forcing their side of the party. That we as a party are making claims, de jure claims, not as individuals, as a collective government. The other side of the party hasn't showed up yet. The imposter keeps coming in. Their representative keeps coming in to represent them. And who's that? U.S. Who's that? United States. Not to be confused with United States of America. They're imposters. We're not talking to the right party. The only way to get the proper party to come to the table, now we have to go to UN, the OAS, Organization of American States. We got to go to the indigenous departments to say, hey, imposters are responding to our correspondence. We're trying to reach out to the real original party to this contract. Can you assist us? In the meantime, we continue this correspondence. That way we put on the record the fraudulent representative of the U.S. pretending to be the United States of America. We're putting on the record through their mail fraud, pretending to be the United States of America, and they are not. All the headers of their documents say U.S. They're frauds. And we're calling them out. We're collecting what's called inculpatory evidence that we'll bring in our lawsuit because they're frauds. And they're providing what's called false statements. And fraud has no statute of limitation. We can go back years and bring them into consular courts. Let's continue. Number 2, impossibility of performance may not be invoked by a party as a ground for terminating, withdrawing from, or suspending the operation of a treaty if the impossibility is the result of a breach by that party, either of an obligation under the treaty or of any other international obligation owed to any other party to the treaty. So wait a minute. You can't terminate, you can't suspend, you can't withdraw. What options do you have? Let's read it again. Impossibility of performance may not be invoked by a party as a ground of terminating, withdrawing from, or suspending the operation of a treaty if the impossibility is the result of a breach by that party, either of an obligation under the treaty or of any other international obligation owed to any other party to the treaty. What are they really saying here? Two things. One, the person who's causing the impediment can't get out of the treaty. That's number one. The United States can't get out the treaty just because they created impediments. That's number one. That must be understood. Number two, Moors can't get out of the treaty just because there are impediments. You have to deal with any contract says when there's a dispute, you must either deal with an arbitration or litigation, but that contract is enforceable no matter what. So how do we enforce the contract? Well, that's one of maybe three ways. One, we enforce it through our own consular court, in which we have at AMPAC. It's a de jure consular court by the people for the people that voted the Kazi, being me, into that position to deal with the affairs of our government. That's number one, consular court. Number two, we can go directly to the U.S. boss, which is the United Kingdom, through their treaties of Great Britain, Spain, France, etc. They have treaty obligations to perform on the land of Morocco. Because the U.S. nor does the United States of America have jurisdiction at the land or on the land of Morocco. And you see that in your Title 22 United States Code, I believe it's 22, I have to look it up, which is your foreign relations.
141 through 143.
That's correct. So it's Title 22 United States Code, subsection 141 through 143. It's called foreign relations, where the United States and the United States of America relinquish jurisdiction on the land of Morocco, understanding that we're standing on the land of Morocco in northwest of Mexico, politically known as North America, as well as the Moorish Empire, including all of your North Africa countries. And that's from the Kingdom of Morocco, North Africa, all the way over to Egypt, and including even the Ottoman Empire, which goes through the so-called Middle East, all the way up into Turkey, etc. That's all the Moorish Empire. All right? All right, let's get back to point. So therefore, the third option, we go directly to UN, ICJ, in order to report the dispute, so we can bring in a referee. So you need a referee when you're dealing with a dispute, so you can deal with a settlement, i.e. arbitration, before you get into litigation. ICJ is more litigation. So they're going to ask if we try to settle this bit within the next few months or within 365 days, or then they'll have to intervene from a litigation perspective. Okay? So therefore, Moors can't even get out of the contract. However, there is a fourth option. Our contract of 1786, 87, the original contract, says it's for 50 years. And then that contract was renewed in 1836, Treaty of Peace and Friendship. Article 25 now has more specific language that says the contract will be terminated if either the parties or one of the parties wants to terminate it. But they must do it in a year in advance, must start those negotiations. So therefore, the 1836 Treaty of Peace and Friendship will expire, terminate in the year 2036. So therefore, Moors have to start negotiating whether we're going to renew it or not in the year 2035, 1 year prior to its termination. All right? So we got about four options. What do we do in the interim? The first thing is try to fight it through consular court. Why? As the Prophet Noble Drew Ali says, and as Tajri Bey has presented to us again redundantly, be yourself. So in being ourselves, we claimed our nationality. Second thing we had to do is create a government. And with that government, then we created a trust to function with contracts as well as an allodial land claim to make the claim from an adverse claim perspective. It's all about the land. Because the land controls both the air and the water. It's all the resources. As it says in the rights of indigenous people, the land goes back along with its resources. What's the resources? Everything that's on the land, in the land, and above it. So from the core of the earth all the way to the cosmos, that's Moorish property, period. Let's continue. So why is 61 important? Because it points out that there was an error made from Article 48 error, and then Article 49 goes right into fraud. There's some fraud that took place. Some fraud is something that happened outside the contract, bill of attainder ex post facto. Okay? Then there was some corruption happen, some coercion happened, some use of force under just cogence, changing the words, hypothecation is cheap. Now we're starting to point out, okay, specifics. What specifically happened? Pointing out the impediments. We can point out the impediment. What's the impediment happen? Well, we can point out their acts, fraudulent acts of 1868, 1870, and 1871 specifically. That's where they gave us the evidence on the material, tangible evidence to take them to court to use as our inculpatory evidence. My question to them is, who's the real party that's going to show up? Because it must be a United States of America representative, A, and B, what's going to be their exculpatory evidence when they can't say that the Moors consented to being Negro, Black, Colored, and African American? We didn't consent to that. They do not have a defense. So therefore, they must act like they don't recognize Moors whatsoever because they know they don't have a defense. Their defense right now is just to put on the blinders and say, see no evil, hear no evil. That's what they're doing right now, not recognizing. But they can't do that anymore because AMPAC has a constitution going to force them back into the contract. Okay, let's continue. Any questions about Article 61? All right, so that's a good explanation just to give you some overview, some interpretation of Article 61. As you can see, when we read, we're not just pronouncing words. We're going to break down every word. We're going to go right into the linear entry and get a parable to what are they talking about. You must go back and get your inculpatory evidence or exculpatory evidence if you're the defendant to deal with material breaches. We always go back and look at their acts. We go back and look at treaties. We go back and look at Constitution. Every once in a while, we might look at some stare decisis, etc., which is their obligations to themselves, but we already know they're criminals. All right, so let's keep it simple. So that's Article 61. All right.